What is going on, everyone? Today I have Griffin from 4K on to talk about some pretty interesting things, right? So we typically think about NFTs really and blockchain as this really kind of like meta space that all lives in the digital. But there actually are a lot of really, really cool uses for it for tokenization of physical assets, and what that means for the industry and really the market as a whole is really, really fascinating. So we're fortunate to have Griffin on again from 4K today to talk a little bit about they're really the ones pioneering this concept of like tokenization of physical assets, right? So we're going to dig into a little bit of it, but right now I'd like to introduce Griffin. Hello, man. How's it going?
Hey Corey, what's going on? Good to see you again.
Good to see you. How's the day going?
Day is good. We're here in LA Tuesday after what we'll call is the Monday. I think they're calling it Blue Monday with everything that happened in the Taro ecosystem and just plugging along, building in the real world and intersection of Web3. So never a dull moment, and look forward to chatting about Gigster and 4K.
Yeah, of course, man. Yeah, that we're gonna get into a little bit more, but yeah, that whole concept, right, of like physical and digital, and like the link between them is such a important step for the space and really for onboarding new users. But to start, I would love to know just or let the audience know maybe a little bit of background on yourself. How you got into Web3. I feel like that's always a super interesting thing to learn about people.
Yeah, everyone has their different paths down the rabbit hole. For me, really happened in 2014, 2015 when I was still in college, actually. So was a student and was really at business school at the time, actually. And what I saw happening in Bitcoin, this was in the time of the Silk Road and Mount Gox really kind of collapsing, was like a fatal misbranding. And I saw so much power behind people experimenting with this new decentralized currency and whoever Satoshi was. And there's such a, phenomenal mystery. And it just kind of kept me reading on Reddit and blogs and wherever you could find information back then more than my textbooks engaged me on traditional business. So I really just became in in I guess you would say I developed an interesting relationship learning about Bitcoin and then Ethereum and smart contracts. And my business school peers at the time really just dismissed that. And that led me to path in marketing at Pepsi, where I would be exploring these ideas further until it just kind of became appropriate to really dive into the space full time in 2018 when I was at Consensus, which is one of the leading Ethereum venture studios in the space, responsible for MetaMask now and Fura, a lot of the core infrastructure. And I was there in the early days when it was really a different company and had a lot of different fun experimental projects, one of which was called GovernX, where we were basically building token rights and different ways of voting and coming to consensus within these new ways to come to consensus within these new ecosystems. So really was thinking about blockchain always as this great equalizer, this new technology. Of course, it had this economic impact, but there was so much more to it. And of course, like most things, I actually have this interesting story where because I saw everything that happened right and so wrong in 2018, 19, I was out of the space for a while and then back as an entrepreneur and individual. And my first project was actually experimenting at the physical before I even joined 4K and what it meant to be inspired by crypto and how people could really communicate with it, because it's always been such an awareness issue of how you can really understand something that's so experimental, nascent, has real use cases worth dabbling into, but knowing that, like, hey, it's not all here today.
Yeah, and that amazing journey, by the way. I remember I was out in San Francisco in probably 2018, and going to some of going to see as Joseph Lubin speak at some of the consensus like meetups and how small they were, and then to see where it's been now. It's incredible thing. But you brought up an interesting point around experimentation and like that thought around the physical being tied to the digital. I think that's such an important bridge, right? That's such a especially for new entrants into the space or new people trying to grasp what this concept is. Like, how do these digital goods hold intrinsic value? Why are people paying so much for it? For people that are used to the physical, like that's such a leap. But it seems that some of your experimentation and kind of what 4K is doing now is like, how do you connect those two? How do you build that bridge between the physical and digital, and then provide extra value to both of them through that connection. So that's my interpretation of somewhat of, you know, where 4K is, but maybe like if you want to give like the better, the
Yeah.
more concise
I,
pitch of what you guys
I
are
I
building.
really couldn't say it better, and I think like that's entirely it. What we see is actually building kind of the protocol layer and the building blocks for this bridge on connecting these worlds. So we have a lot of exciting ideas of where that will go, but ultimately we're trying to be agnostic as we're building this protocol to empower marketplaces, entrepreneurs, creators to use it in new ways, just as they've used Ethereum in new ways, and be able to, and NFTs, for instance, in new ways, and be able to experiment with the physical and digital counterpart and what that truly means in terms of a connection, both as an authenticity in the real world, like, hey, I know this is a wallet that Corey designed. This didn't come from somewhere else. This was you actually created this, and you can apply that to brands. And of course, that provenance is so key. But also the secondary side of things in the metaverse, what does having an NFT mean in terms of, is that digital connection in discords, is that it, is it something beyond that? And from what 4K is really experienced in is being the protocol layer and the infrastructure of connecting these, having an NFT that is basically a digital warehousing receipt so that you can get that item at any time, or that you can more easily sell it as well when it's in custody with 4K, which we can get into later as well.
Gotcha. Yeah. So I mean, for those that are watching that don't know, you know, when we say a tokenization of a physical asset, right? That's I think a lot of people might be like, well, so like, what does that mean, tokenization? Do you mail me a, you know, a Chuck E. Cheese coin for whenever, you know, that is? So I mean, if you can give us a little, like, you know, like I'm a 5-year-old, right? Like this is what it means to use this idea of 4K tokenized assets. Like what are we like? What are we all thinking about?
Yeah, I think there's a couple different ways. The most simple is you send an item to 4K. Let's say this is a watch you care about, and we'll issue you an NFT that's just a beautiful photo of that watch that has metadata, the condition of the watch. It's graded with an authenticator. So we know it's an 8 out of 10 condition instead of a 9 out of 10. We explain to you what those conditions mean. When it's in custody with 4K, you have this NFT. And just like you might have an NFT of a Bored Ape or a Crypto Punk or whatever your favorite collection is, you can now have this NFT that validates that you have a physical item in condition with what we're calling 4K is this provably neutral intermediary to bringing these items to Web3. And once they're in that NFT form, of course, you can display it on your wall. There'll be these primitives on how community is built there, but you can also easily sell it. And compared to traditional marketplaces that are really not necessarily peer-to-peer or take a layer while they are peer-to-peer and they're masquerading as providing value-add services, right? We're actually authenticating those and removing so much friction. So that's kind of on the consumer side, how you interact with 4K. On the brand side, I think what we're talking about is tokenized merch, which we see physical brands dropping in terms of like the thousands in the future, where every great limited edition physical item has an NFT counterpart that is authenticating that this is the legitimate item from a collection. And if it's in 4K, you'll know it's in that mint condition. So it can be traded or it can be redeemed. And then after redemption, what that means, since you have that NFT receipt, will be up to those creators to build those experiences, let's say in the metaverse around them.
Got it. Got it. Got it. So just to play it back, right? So if I wanted to, right, I could. Um, I could send you my Stormtrooper helmet. You guys would take some pictures, turn it into an NFT, right? And then I could, in theory, people could buy and sell and trade the representation of this item, the one-to-one, back and forth as much as they want. And then eventually, if someone bought it and was like, wow, I actually really want that in my office, they could basically say, hey, 4K, I'm ready to redeem it. And then you guys would mail them the authentic original item, and then the NFT goes
Yep.
away.
That that is exactly right. I really love your analogy there. And in terms of the NFT going away, one little nuance there, it's actually the status changes, right? So it isn't the same NFT anymore, but we could program it so that it basically says like, hey Corey, it's redeemed so that like it was once with 4K, and that's when it would be relevant to be building experiences on top of. I think, and that's what Unisocks did, right? So
Mm-hmm.
when you actually deposited your ERC20 token, they gave you an ERC721. That's like a SOX redeem token, and that is, I think, the interesting model of what will probably be relevant and interesting in terms of how you can build on top of this. And I think a question we often get asked is like, well, why would you ever want to put that piece of memorabilia? Like, why store it at 4K? Don't you want it at your house? And I think a good question is, well, how many things do you really want at your house when you're investing in collectibles? And this is a
Mm-hmm.
growing asset class. What if you want exposure to collectibles and the 3PL aspect and everything that goes into authentication, storage, insurance? Those are super high cost drivers that eat at resale values. So if you store with 4K, you ultimately have that digital representation where you don't have that same beautiful physical piece, which we still value at 4K, but you have that digital version that you can flex, let's say, in the meantime. And then it, should you choose to split, you'll be exposed to far less fees than the traditional marketplace.
Gotcha. Right. So you guys are really that trusted authority and the bridge between the physical and digital. That way, I know if I'm buying, a Rolex NFT, um, and that I know that basically whoever's selling it isn't lying, right? Someone has been there to actually prove that it is an authentic item, and then you can track that provenance of the NFT to understand who has come from, the fact it hasn't been redeemed, so it is real, right? And that concept of that's fascinating because it almost like creates these abilities to have these secondary markets that are way easier to engage with other people that are interested in a given space, right? Whether that's watch collectors or memorabilia collectors, whatever, vintage clothing, whatever that might be, a way to like engage with others in that space in ways that you typically can't do in the physical, right? Like it's very hard for me to go find Star
Yeah,
Wars collectors that are
absolutely.
close to me, right?
Well, the full life cycle of how a brand or someone can engage with people who love their items, that's what's changing with NFTs and why it's so awesome. But we have to remember, people, as excited as we are about the metaverse, even the metaverse is a manifestation of our real world, right? Like it's still physical in some sense. And I think whether it's in bits and code, in VR, AR, whatever you kind of like think is your most sound adaptation, we're still all here in like atoms today, and blockchain is useful in transferring value, as we know, seamlessly in so many exciting ways. And I think NFTs are that first layer that can actually be adopted and understood by so many, even though it's a bit complex, on how they can prove that an item exists in the real world. And
Mm-hmm.
4K building the protocol, really not just that we're like that one trusted party. There will eventually be many nodes and partners as well that can authenticate and attest to this in a cryptographically secure way. And that's what we're truly excited about building. And it's, I think, even further down the rabbit hole and not in and harder to understand than like the simple great use cases today of like how merch tokenized is changing
Mm-hmm.
the game.
Yeah, and so so you bring up an interesting point. So you mentioned how tokenized merch, right, is changing the game. Um, can you like elaborate on that a little bit more? So like, let's say that I am a really large brand, right? And I'm like, okay, you know what? Tokenized merch sounds cool. Like sounds like something that it's an easy step for us to get into Web3 because it makes sense. We've been making merch or, for forever. Our customers know about buying our merch. Like why is doing tokenized merch like so valuable? So like why does it make sense?
I love that question. I think my first answer is like caution is it's not as easy as a plug-in and like sell tokenized merch, even assuming the service is offered and ubiquitous. I think conventional brands sometimes lean in too quickly to Web3 without kind of thinking of just like the who, what, where, why of why you're doing a project. And tokenized merch is a fantastic way and a conduit to lean in effectively, but it still requires that first principle of thinking like, hey, why am I doing an NFT project in the first place? Is a $6 pair of socks that you sell all of the time worth tokenizing on any blockchain? You can argue about the supply chain and other things and kind of like its production, but in terms of the resale market, probably not, right? So you have to be careful in what you're really, you have to make sure the project makes sense. And I know that's such a simple like question and framework, but all of the time, I think you'll be surprised even executives aren't really thinking about that. They just like want to do something in Web3. And by being strategic about how you approach it and how you lean in and think about it as a continual chasm of how you can connect with creators who both in primary and secondary markets want to invest in your brand and in that upside of kind of being a part of something, that digital like golf club membership in a way, which is such a traditional analogy. That's clearly what's taking off. So I think what we love about tokenized merch is it's easy, it's understandable, but it should still have the strategic idea of like, why put one of your items on the blockchain? Simply put, by doing this, you're creating a new economic instrument to sell in Web3 really effectively via an NFT. You're accepting crypto, so you're going along the ecosystem, which is always kind of a valid sign. And as well, you're introducing limited edition and the potential. If you think about NFT and wallet addresses and holding the NFT as the new email, like that's your engagement point with them. So you give them this physical item. 4K is a fancy 3PL in the background that mints the NFTs and helps get them to the end user. But that's really where the journey continues to begin and evolve, is after that primary and secondary of, well, okay, if this jacket is tokenized merch and I've now redeemed it, what's the follow-up from here? Is it new collections? Is it different ideas? Is it access to special events? Is it perks? Is it discounts? And those are all things that are enabled like pretty easily via NFTs, and why you're seeing so much fun experimentation. And what I think we're just forgetting about a lot is the physical layer and how to make that a more effective manner of experimenting in this space.
Yeah, no, that's excellent insight, right? And again, I always try to stress this or over stress this as much as possible, right? Like to just from a brand or large IP or business perspective, to just kind of FOMO your way into Web3 without thinking about what is the longer term, what are the potential upsides and things that you can continuously offer value for these assets, is so incredibly important. So I'm happy that you said that, right? And I agree too that you mentioned the chasm, and I think that we're in this kind of interesting evolutionary stage, right? Of where NFTs and digital value is kind of, the market segment is kind of at this point where we've had a lot of like super great early adopters, right? And people are understanding that it's there, like, okay, I see it. And now to drive that next giant wave, having options to provide offerings to these new entrants into the space that allows them to like cognitively click a little bit easier, rather than just being, okay, you want me to pay $500 for this picture, like I need a little bit more to help convince me, right? And I think that doing that, being able to offer that level of like physical and digital, will help like bring in that new market segment that is the next wave, right? And so for businesses to look at this as an opportunity where, if you feel for like whatever reason, maybe NFTs and Web3 before didn't quite click with your target audience, like this is the next thing that you can be, oh my gosh, this totally makes sense for them.
And I actually think those businesses that probably sat on it because it wasn't clicking, like look at where the markets are today and what does click, it was probably wise of them to wait. And that's why I do think this is so interesting as that way to dabble in, as you mentioned, because it is what you're really just enabling is like the basic primitives and mechanics. Like you're selling an item for crypto, and we don't do that enough in blockchain. And there's obviously so many other components to these building blocks that the 4K protocol is building, but just that core, like, hey, if you're a brand, you can ship to us by the pallet. We'll make these as NFTs. As they sell, you can, receive income in stable coin USDC and ETH and wrap Bitcoin. Like that is not something people are offering or businesses like do very easily. And I think there's more of an appetite in the world right now to start experimenting. And of course, think about all these community benefits. And with like a cohesive NFT strategy, what really is unlocked by this first layer of simply like accepting crypto as payment in a native way.
Yeah, that's fascinating because the idea that 4K is like removing a lot of that complexity around, you said you can mail as a pallet of whatever it might be, right? And then you guys will handle turning into the NFT and then, doing like basically kind of like the supply chain or like, managing the fulfillment side of the house on top of the protocol that you offer. Is that right?
Yeah, so that's kind of goes into our tokenized merch offering where 4K today, like this fancy 3PL or a Web3 enabled 3PL is a great way of thinking about it, because how do you authenticate if, again, just use this, I'm Corey, I'm launching a new bucket hat that there's only 25 I want to give to like all of your fans. You have a great podcast, you're a streamer, right?
Love
So
bucket hats, by the way, too.
yeah, so you're launching this bucket hat, you want to sell it in ETH, but like, what if this is going to be super limited in the future and someone's going to try and rip it off and, create fakes of it? What you can do by launching with 4K is that original provenance. Like you go on Twitter, like, hey, I'm verifying my profile on 4K, similar to how you do this sign in with Web3 from a wallet address, and you're paid in that. So you're removing the intermediary in this case to enable like you to sell an item to your fans, and you just happen to be getting, of course you'll pay for those as needed, but you're getting all of these additional services of the actual redemption. Because custody, the bucket hat, people might want it, but if for some reason it was, let's say, a rare coin, they might want to keep that in custody with 4K, and having it insured and in a vault that's better than like a bank grade security is actually like a huge feature for these users.
No, got it. That's interesting to think about, because too, so the other question I have, like pretty straightforward, right, is that it seems like we've circled a lot around like leveraging this for small runs, like collectible items, right? I mean, and to me that seems very obvious, like near term, like that totally makes sense. Like let's say though that for whatever reason, maybe I wanted my sweet bucket hat collection to be, 10,000 or 50,000. Like, do you still see tokenized merch like being a valuable strategy to kind of basically be able to offer multiple purchasing, trading, secondary market sales for assets?
Absolutely. Like the foundational core of crypto is building markets and letting people trade what they want to trade. And this is bringing physical assets on chain has always been a holy grail. So I think having that of blockchain and crypto. So I think having that agnostic view and not like playing favorites of what might be valuable to trade is really important. Is it feasible to have 50,000 pairs of tokenized hats? I think there will probably see, and it will evolve. Something we're talking about is airdrop merch, which is basically a subset of this, which is, okay, you just want to send these out and have better fulfillment options, and like airdrop and NFT, it's like a better gift, right? So it still would make sense. And I think there's a demand and a service for that. The question you were saying, which is a deeper one, is there a second, like, are people creating secondary markets on top of more commonplace items. Typically, what drives secondary markets is rare items or vintage or limited edition brands. So I think the tokenized merch aspect of it falls into that, but there's only going to be so much overlap. And that really, like that baby Yoda in the back, whatever that is, that seems like something people might want to trade.
Right.
Is, traditionally, this is actually rather famous LA artist behind me, but there isn't liquidity behind that object. If this was at 4K and I had a screen of that, like, do I feel differently? And then could I theoretically get bids out on that item at any time? I think that's what the future is. There's so much unproductive assets and artwork and watches sitting in banks or free ports, wherever it might be. But if you're bringing that on chain, you can actually create like really cool financial primitives and markets around these items.
That's something I've never thought about, but it's a great way to put it, right? Like unproductive assets. Like that concept is fascinating to me, and being able to, create a platform and a process and a protocol that allows like to tap into a whole new world of liquidity, and really trying to get that, being able to tap into to markets at a global scale is incredible. And I think that how that's going to impact like businesses and stuff down the road is going to be fascinating. Because the other part too that my mind starts to like wander to is that, as the metaverse, everyone's definition of whatever that might be, starts to take off. But like, will there be, for instance, like with the craze, and like, not to compare this like to the Sims or something, but where there's this concept of like having items and goods and stuff that you and your digital self own, and it being able to have some of those that are actually backed by physical items that either you own or you have the opportunity to trade it and get the physical side, I think is this like crazy cool connection layer, that it for so long, especially up until now, it's always seemed like, metaverse is over here, physical is like way somewhere else, like just totally disjunct. And now to merge those two is cool.
So as a student of crypto for so long, Uniswap is of course one of these amazing innovations in crypto, and what has launched so many of DEXs and trading, and how they basically launched AMMs and liquidity pools. And that's not why we're here today, but something I find really interesting is we're all kind of sleeping on how Unisocks, which is of course built on top of Uniswap and took so many great ideas and combined it with some other crypto primitives. I think that's what's truly the future of limited edition, scarce branded merchandising when you're talking like really high value collectible items. Because at least something I experience, I'm a TA for Warden's digital assets and economics of blockchain course. When I tell them that people trade pairs of socks for $70,000, like their minds are blown. But then when I get deep into what the mechanics of this launch and what actually happened and how it traded and like what a bonding curve is and how it enables price discovery, and like you realize that, oh, like this is super applicable and this is kind of happening offline markets. Like this is already what goes on, just people trading watches. But then them being available on StockX and Chrono 24 brings more transparency to prices only to a certain extent, right? So the innovation of Unisocks is something that gets everyone at 4K really excited, as we kind of hold that as inspiration and think that's what brands will ultimately be doing on top of 4K, is introducing those financial primitives to really discover the true value behind a certain asset. And it encourages community building, lower prices, can block out speculators as well in new ways. Another thing we haven't chatted about is provably fair drops. Basically the idea of like, how do you do drops in the, like if you think about how NFT raffles happen and how people line up at Supreme, we can basically on 4K via cryptographic hashes have a provably fair way to do a sweepstakes and choose who a winner is. So you could have 500 people going for one pair of Yeezy shoes, all enter their wallet addresses, all show that they're willing to pay for that, and show via blockchain that you're not gaming the system, you're not giving it to your friend, right? And I think that when you think about the building that, or when you think about how that scales, is really exciting.
Mm-hmm. No, that is fascinating, because I think that, I'm one of those where it's like, I hate the concept of like whitelist and all of this, because like I don't have time to like do all of this stuff, but I am really interested in some of the the projects and stuff that are out there. And then at the end of the day, it's like, are they really giving away these mint spots to people? Are they reserving rares for major influencers that go and help promote the project? And so I've never had like a better answer for it. I've always just been like, grumpy like person about it.
Yeah.
But I've never been able to say, this is how you would do it better.
Yeah,
But
like how can you participate in a meaningful way and do it better? And I'm sure there will be bumps along the road, and there's always continued people trying to game the system in crypto, but it is an innovation to think about those factors and isolate them and be able to offer something better, which we're really able to do through provably fair jobs.
gotcha. That's exciting. Yeah. So I mean, I've got to ask though. So like, what's the roadmap for 4K? Where you guys like, what's up next? Anything big in the works that
Yeah.
you can share?
So I hate to be like that cliche, like blockchain person, like, well, what can you actually do today? Like, how easy is it? And the truth is like, it takes that integration and like that partnership team to think about like, is this the right project? So tokenized merch and collections and what we've been chatting about today, that's actually a feature set that we're launching this summer. And we're doing our first pilot and experimental projects with a variety of creators. Like, really excited about this nonprofit artist who's a sculpturist who has 50 different sculptures he'll be doing with us, and some other projects that this summer we're really building out the case studies internally for what this looks like. And
Mm-hmm.
then from there, how we can support that at scale. And of course, what we haven't bridged too well here, since we wanted to stay focused on like what like physical assets in the metaverse looks like, which is still an early question that keeps us up at night. Well, 4K is really building long term, which you can kind of find on our website, 4k.com, is that physical coordination layer. So it's really through, and this is what will take years, not months, to develop. It's how you can bring together all of these intermediaries that exist in these markets right now in the real world. So whether that be auction houses, authenticators, brands, and bring them together in a trustless, coordinated way so they can all share more upside together and ultimately lose or maintain more value. I think what's interesting from a brand perspective is they sell once to their user, and if that item goes up in value or if it becomes a meme or something super interesting, like they don't have that continued experience. And there's a way that these experiences can be connected, I think, through bridging the physical and digital. And ultimately it's the super early days, but we think through enabling like those first use cases of tokenized merch and showing that Unisocks isn't really a one-off. It's a financial innovation that deserves to be built upon and iterated and tested out by really cool people. And that's what's the immediate term is, as we're kind of building out the necessary elements of what's needed in this coordination layer.
Gotcha. That's exciting, man. I can't wait to see. That I'm so excited about what you guys are working on, and the progress that y'all have made, and seeing, really just understanding, like our philosophy here at Gigster is just to bring mass market adoption of blockchain and decentralization, and what you guys have done is incredible. So thank you so much for stopping by today, and taking some time to chat. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Corey. It's been a pleasure. Really enjoy chatting with you, and look forward to seeing what's in the pipeline together.
Awesome. Cheers, man. And with that, Griffin from 4K, it's amazing. And I suggest everyone like take some time to actually like go look into this more. The whole concept around, you know, bridging the gap between the digital and the physical, I think has been like loosely out there for a while, but it hasn't been pressured as much as it's going to in the coming months and the coming years. And 4K is at the head of the curve, and not only being able to have the protocol and the software and tech to facilitate it, but also that physical infrastructure and process layer that helps provide that level of provenance and trust in that, you know, the assets that you're getting or you're buying or you're trading that are, you know, stamped that this is backed by a physical asset is real, and that you will be able to redeem whatever, you know, potentially redeem whatever type of physical asset you think that you are investing or purchasing in. And with that, thank you all for stopping by. And Keith, let's run the outro.